I planned the perfect surprise for my wife at her workplace. Flowers in hand, heart full, ready to see her smile. But the moment I reached the entrance, a security guard stopped me cold. No entry for unauthorized persons. When I said, "I'm the boss's husband," he didn't look confused. He smirked. "Sir, I see your wife every day. There she is, coming out right now." So I did the only thing I could. I stepped aside and pretended nothing was wrong. Then she appeared, not alone. She was holding her boss's arm, laughing like they'd done this 100 times, and they slipped into a car together while the guard watched like it was normal. My stomach dropped. I followed them to a nearby hotel, recording everything, praying I was imagining it. That night I checked her overtime, dates, messages, receipts, everything lined up with strange charges and deleted photos. And that's when I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a secret life. If you want the full story and what I discovered next, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss this. I left the house with two things in my hands, my phone and a paper-wrapped bouquet I'd grabbed from the grocery store near our place. Nothing fancy, just something bright to cut through a week that had felt thin. My mornings ran on habit. Coffee, shower, a quick scan of emails before I even sat down to eat. I worked in compliance long enough to trust patterns more than promises. When something changed, I noticed. I didn't always say it out loud, but I noticed. Lately, my wife had been changing things. A new password on her phone, notifications turned off, short answers when I asked about her day, like she was handing me a receipt instead of a conversation. "Busy," she'd say, already halfway into the next thought. "Bored stuff? I'll tell you later." Later didn't come. She ran her company the way she ran everything, tight, controlled, always moving. I respected that. I'd married it in a way. But respect doesn't fill a room when the person you live with feels miles away while sitting right across from you. 2 weeks earlier, I'd called her office because I couldn't reach her. It wasn't an emergency, I just needed a quick answer about a dinner she'd promised to make time for. A man answered the building line before it transferred. "Who is this?" he asked. No hello. No tone like he was doing his job, more like I'd interrupted him. "I'm her husband," I said. A pause, then a little laugh I didn't like. "She's not available," he said. "You can email like everybody else." The call ended. No name, no apology, nothing. When I told my wife about it that night, she didn't look surprised. "Security's been updated," she said, staring into her laptop. "They're just doing what they're told." I wanted to argue. I didn't. Peace has a cost, and I'd been paying it for years without keeping a receipt. So that Thursday, I decided to stop waiting for later. I took an early lunch, bought flowers, and drove to Midtown. A simple surprise, a normal husband thing. 5 minutes in the lobby, a kiss on the cheek, a quick laugh before she disappeared into meetings again. The building smelled like clean tile and expensive air freshener. I walked in like I belonged there because I did, at least, I thought I did. The security guard stood behind the desk in a crisp uniform, same posture as the voice on the phone. He didn't greet me. He watched me approach like he was already tired of me. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I'm here to see my wife," I said. "She's the CEO." His eyes flicked down to the flowers, then back to my face. "No entry for unauthorized persons." I kept my voice even. "I'm her husband." That's when his mouth curled, not quite a smile, something meaner, like a private joke. "Sir," he said, slow, "I see your wife every day." My throat tightened. I didn't move, didn't blink. He leaned slightly, like he was doing me a favor. "There she is," he added, nodding toward the glass doors. Coming out right now. I could have stepped forward. I could have demanded he call her. I could have made a scene in the lobby and forced everyone to look. Instead, I shifted to the side, near a row of chairs. I held the bouquet lower, like it suddenly didn't belong in my hands. My heart kept punching at my ribs, but my face stayed still. That's what I did. That's what I'd always done. The doors opened. My wife walked out, heels clicking, phone in hand. She didn't scan the lobby the way she usually did. She didn't look for me. She wasn't alone. A man moved beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed as they talked. Older than me, smooth suit, the kind of confidence that comes from being obeyed more than questioned. She smiled at something he said, soft, familiar. Not a business smile, not the one she used on investors. His hand touched her elbow, guiding her like they'd done it before. My fingers tightened around the stems until the paper crinkled. I couldn't hear their words from where I stood, but I didn't need sound to understand closeness. They headed toward the curb, and she didn't turn her head once. The guard's eyes slid to me, then away, like the show was over. I stayed where I was until they reached the sidewalk. My feet finally moved, not toward them, away. Out through the revolving door, down the steps, into the parking garage where my car waited. I got inside, shut the door, and set the flowers on the passenger seat like they were groceries I'd forgotten to put away. My hands hovered over the steering wheel, and my phone sat heavy in my palm as I pulled up my contacts and stared at her name without pressing it. My thumb hovered over her contact photo. I didn't tap it. A black sedan rolled up to the curb outside the building. Not her car. Not a rideshare either. No sticker, no phone propped on the dash, no driver checking a screen. The man opened the rear door first, like it was second nature. My wife stepped in without hesitation. He slid in after her. The door shut. The engine eased forward. I started my car on instinct, like my body had already decided for me. Pulling up the garage ramp, I told myself I wasn't chasing. I was verifying. There's a difference between being suspicious and being careful. I'd made a living off that difference. Traffic didn't cooperate, but it didn't matter. The sedan stayed within sight, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Once we hit the main roads toward Buckhead, the gaps opened and closed like a pulse. I kept one car between us when I could. When I couldn't, I backed off and waited for a light to catch us both. At the next stop, I looked down at the flowers on the passenger seat. The paper had torn a little where my fingers had crushed it. A petal had fallen loose and stuck to the seatbelt. I faced forward again. The sedan turned into a hotel driveway, one of those places built for people who never park themselves. A man in a vest stepped out and approached the driver. My wife and the man got out together. No rush, no scanning the street. She walked like she belonged there, like this was a normal part of her day. He didn't offer his arm, not exactly. He didn't need to. They moved in sync, shoulders close, their steps matching. When she laughed again, something in my chest tightened in a way I didn't recognize as anger. It felt more like my body trying to protect me from what my eyes were collecting. I parked a few spaces down and sat for a beat, hands on the wheel, breathing shallow. A part of me wanted to storm up to the entrance and say her name loud enough to echo. Another part of me, older, tired, more disciplined, kept the door locked and my seatbelt on. That part won. Inside, I stayed near the lobby edge, pretending to scroll through my phone. No sunglasses, no dramatic hiding, just a man in a plain shirt, holding himself together with routine. The desk staff glanced my way once, then looked past me like I was furniture. My wife and the man didn't approach the front desk. They angled toward the lounge area, the kind of space where people meet without leaving a trail. They took a corner table. He leaned in, speaking low. She listened with a tight expression that kept shifting. Professional 1 second, uncertain the next. I lifted my phone slightly and snapped a couple photos, quick and quiet. Not because I wanted a souvenir, because I knew what it looked like when someone tries to rewrite history later. 2 older men passed behind me and nodded at the bartender like regulars. A woman in a blazer walked by with a laptop bag, already on a call. Everything around me kept moving, like the world hadn't noticed my life tipping. I watched my wife reach for her water glass, then stop halfway. She set it down without drinking. Her fingers tapped the table twice, a habit she had when she was thinking hard or trying not to show nerves. That detail landed differently than the laughter. I told myself not to invent reasons, not to soften the picture, not to harden it either. Just hold what was in front of me. A few minutes later, my wife stood. The man stood with her. They left the lounge and headed toward the elevators. That was the line. I didn't follow them upstairs. I couldn't pretend that would end well. I didn't need more than what I'd already seen to know the foundation under me had cracked. I walked out of the hotel, got back into my car, and sat there with my phone in my lap. The first impulse was still to call her. The second impulse was to throw the flowers out the window like they'd offended me. Instead, I drove. The route home felt longer than it should have. At a red light, my phone buzzed. A text from a guy I'd worked with years ago. Not a close friend, more like someone who knew my face and my name. "You good?" I stared at it. A minute later, another one came in. This time from a woman whose husband knew my wife from some business event. She didn't ask what happened. She asked something worse. "Hey, is everything okay over there?" No context, no lead-in, just that. My mouth went dry. People don't send messages like that out of nowhere. They send them when they've heard something, half a story, a rumor shaped by whoever spoke first. I pictured that security guard's smile again. The way he'd delivered his line like entertainment. The way he'd watched me step aside like he'd practiced it. I didn't answer either text. Not yet. At home, I walked in, set my keys down, and placed the flowers in the sink like I didn't trust myself to decide what to do with them. My hands washed automatically. Soap, rinse, dry. The same way I did after handling paperwork at work. Something about the routine kept me from shaking. I checked the time. She wouldn't be home for hours, if she came home at all. A thought tried to push forward. Maybe there's an explanation, but I held it back. Explanations are easy. Evidence takes patience. I called one person. Elena Torres picked up on the second ring. She worked on the legal side of compliance for a firm downtown. The kind of friend you keep because she doesn't get swept up by emotion. She asks questions. She remembers what you forget. "Marcus?" she said, voice steady. "What's going on?" I exhaled through my nose. "I saw something," I told her. "At my wife's office." "What kind of something?" I gave her the short version. Not dramatic, not polished. Just the facts I had. Lobby, guard, the comment, the man, the car, the hotel. There was a pause on her end. Not shock, not sympathy. Calculation. "Do you have anything besides what you think it meant?" she asked. The question hit hard because it was fair. "Photos," I said. "Time, location." "Good," she replied. "Don't talk to anyone else yet. Don't confront her in public. Start writing down the timeline while it's fresh. License plate if you got it, receipts if you can. And if you can pull any public cameras around the curb, do it the right way. I'm not trying to burn her down, I said, then realized I wasn't sure if that was true. Elena didn't scold me. She didn't comfort me either. Then don't, she said. But don't let them burn you down first. I sat at my kitchen table after the call ended, phone beside me, a legal pad pulled from a drawer. The pen felt heavier than it should have. I wrote the date at the top anyway, then the time I'd walked into her building, then the exact sentence that guard had said, word for word, as if I'd taken it down in a report. The list grew one line at a time until the page filled, and when I reached the moment the sedan turned toward Buckhead, my hand slowed and I started a second page without lifting my eyes from the paper. The second page filled faster than the first. Time, place, what I saw, what I didn't hear, what I could prove. That's how my mind worked when something didn't add up. Not because I enjoyed digging, because guessing has consequences. I opened our shared calendar on my laptop. For months, my wife had blocked off evenings with the same clean label, overtime. No details, no meeting names, just that word, repeated like a stamp. At first, I'd accepted it. She ran a company. Long hours came with the job. Now I pulled up the last 6 weekends and started cross-checking. Her overtime lined up with small gaps, hours where her phone location looked vague, bouncing between towers instead of pinning to one place. That happened in a city sometimes, sure. Still, the pattern bothered me. Saturday afternoons, a couple Fridays, one Sunday night that she'd blamed on an emergency call. I logged into the credit card account we both used for household expenses. A new prompt popped up. Password incorrect. That stopped me for a moment. Not because I couldn't reset it, because she'd done it without mentioning a word. I used the backup login for my own account and scanned the transactions. Nothing wild, no jewelry store, no obvious hotel charge, just tidy little purchases that looked normal until you saw them stacked together. Parking fees in Buckhead, a couple restaurant tabs I didn't recognize, a rideshare charge on a day she swore she'd driven herself. One line item came up twice. Same vendor, different dates. A business lounge inside the same hotel where I'd watched her walk toward the elevators. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen like it might change. The easy answer tried to show up again. Networking, investors, a client dinner, a negotiation. Then I checked our photo cloud. A folder that used to sync automatically now showed gaps, dates with nothing, like someone had swept the floor clean. I opened her recent album on the shared account and found the empty thumbnails where images had been deleted. Not just a one-off, enough to look intentional. My hand went to my phone without thinking. I scrolled through call logs, hers, mine, the shared plan. Short calls at strange times. 2 minutes, 40 seconds, a minute and a half. Never long enough to count as a real conversation. Long enough to confirm something, to coordinate. The more I saw, the more my brain tried to fight me. Maybe I'm spiraling. Maybe this is what happens when you get embarrassed in a lobby and your pride starts looking for proof. I stood up, poured a glass of water, took 2 sips, and set it down. The motion didn't fix anything. It just gave my hands something to do. A text came in from an unknown number. Be careful with that lobby guard. It's not just security over there. No name, no greeting, just that. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I took a screenshot. I didn't reply. People who reach out like that rarely want a conversation. They want to drop a stone and watch the ripples. Still, the message matched the feeling I'd had from the start. Like the guard wasn't protecting a building, like he was protecting a story. I called my wife's office line again. Not her cell, the main line. The same voice answered. Front desk, no company name, no courtesy. This is Marcus Reed, I said. I need to speak with my wife.
She's in meetings, he replied quick.
Put me through. A short pause, then a dry chuckle. Sir, she'll call you when she's free. What's your name? I asked.
Silence. Then,
You don't need my name. The line clicked dead. I held the phone away from my ear and looked at it like it had betrayed me. A strange thing to feel about a piece of plastic. Back at the table, I opened my notes app and started recording everything that had changed in the last month. Password switch. Notifications off. Calendar suddenly private. Shared accounts locked. The office gatekeeper answering like he had authority over my life. Screenshots went into a folder on my laptop. Call logs saved. Dates written down. Nothing dramatic. Just proof that the ground under my feet had shifted while I was busy trying to keep the peace. Another alert popped up when I refreshed the shared calendar. Access limited. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't curse. I just sat there, staring at that little message, and moved my cursor to start a new document with today's date at the top. The alert came in while I was standing at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee I didn't plan to drink. Payment approved. The amount wasn't small. Big enough to matter. Big enough to raise questions if I'd been the one who signed off on it. The description read company expense, and my name sat right under the authorization line like I'd nodded it through myself. I hadn't. I opened the bank app and scrolled, hoping I'd missed an email or a notification. Nothing. No request, no approval ping, just a clean confirmation, already processed. That's when I understood this wasn't private anymore. I drove to her office without calling first. Not to argue, to ask a question in the one place where answers were supposed to exist. The building looked the same as it had a few days earlier, but the tone had shifted. I felt it before anyone spoke. The guard stood straighter this time, like he'd been briefed. "You can't go up," he said as soon as he saw me. "I need to speak with my wife," I replied, "about a transaction that hit my account." His mouth tilted, not quite a smile. "Everything's been approved," he said, "by leadership." "Who approved it?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. "Sir, you're not authorized here." People moved through the lobby behind me. 2 women from accounting, a man with a badge clipped to his belt. No one slowed down. No one asked what was going on. Standing there, I felt something slip that I hadn't realized I was still holding. My place. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. "Put that in writing," I said, "and give me the name of whoever signed off." A pause. He glanced toward the elevators, then back at me. "You'll get an email," he replied, already turning away. I left before he could finish the sentence. Staying would have turned it into a scene, and scenes are easy to dismiss. At home, I pulled the transaction apart, line by line. Vendor, timestamp, internal code. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. Someone had used the system the way it was designed to be used, just not by me. My wife didn't come home until after 9. She dropped her bag by the door and kicked off her shoes without looking up. "Long day," she said. "I saw the charge," I replied. She froze for half a second. Not long. Long enough. "It's company related," she said. "I'll explain later." "You used my authorization," I said. Her shoulders tightened. "That's not what happened." "Then tell me what did." She rubbed her face like she was exhausted, not cornered. "I can't get into it tonight," she said. "There are processes." Processes. Procedures. Words that create distance. We stood in the same room, speaking like colleagues who didn't trust each other. What cut deepest wasn't the money. It was the ease with which I'd been sidelined in a place she controlled. The way authority had shifted without a conversation. I nodded once, not because I agreed, but because I understood the message. Later, while she showered, I sat at the table with my laptop open and added a new line to my document. listing the transaction number and the time it posted. Then opened a separate folder and began pulling the policies that governed approvals, reading until the house went quiet again. The next afternoon, a package showed up on the porch with no return address. Plain brown envelope, my name printed in block letters. No company logo, no postage that told a story. It looked like something someone didn't want traced. I brought it inside and set it on the table, then washed my hands like I'd handled something dirty. That made me pause, because paper shouldn't make you do that. Only fear does. A single sheet sat on top when I opened it. Printed email. Subject line in bold. Internal audit. Preliminary review. Below it, a chain of replies with dates, departments, and a few phrases that made my stomach tighten. Discrepancy. Missing documentation. Access logs attached. Under that were 2 more pages. Badge access records. Timestamps, door codes, elevator banks, names I didn't recognize and a few I did. One line repeated more than it should have. A senior operations executive's badge moving through restricted areas late in the day, often right after my wife's calendar showed overtime. The last page wasn't an email. It was a short meeting note, 3 bullet points, a list of action items. At the bottom, a signature. My wife's handwriting. Not a forged signature typed onto a PDF, real ink scanned into a document. The same slant she used when she signed holiday cards, the same tight loop on her Y. I sat there longer than I meant to, reading the same sentences until they stopped looking like words and started looking like a trap. My phone buzzed. Elena. "You sound quiet," she said. "What happened?" I told her about the envelope, the emails, the badge logs, the note with my wife's signature. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask me how I felt. She went straight to the point. "Your wife runs that company," Elena said. "If there's a compliance issue, she's both the target and the liable party. Someone can lean on her and still make her hold the bag." "So why send this to me?" I asked. "Because whoever sent it thinks you'll act," she replied. "And because someone else is trying to keep you out. That guard isn't just a guard, he's a gate." I rubbed my jaw, trying to stay anchored. "The man I saw with her," I said. "You think it's him?" "Could be," Elena answered. "Or he's part of it. Power doesn't move alone. It uses people." Before I could respond, another call came through on the other line. A number I recognized from the industry, someone I'd met at a conference a couple years back. I let it go to voicemail. The message arrived seconds later. "Marcus, heard some things. Just checking in. Hope you're handling whatever's going on at home." At home. That's how rumors travel. They don't say what they mean, they imply. They invite you to defend yourself before anyone has even accused you in public. I didn't call back. I didn't text him. I didn't ask who'd been talking. Instead, I took photos of every page in the envelope, saved them to a secure folder, then slid the originals into a plastic sleeve like evidence. I wrote down the date and time it arrived. I noted the lack of return address. I logged the voicemail. Elena stayed on the phone while I worked. "Don't confront her in the kitchen," she said. "If this turns into a legal matter, you keep your hands clean. You document. You route it through the right channels." "And if she's part of it?" I asked. A quiet beat. "Then she made her choice," Elena said. "But you still make yours the right way." After we hung up, I opened my laptop again and started building a timeline with 3 columns. Her calendar, the badge logs, and the transactions, lining them up until the overlaps formed something I couldn't ignore. Then I pulled up the contact information for a downtown attorney Elena trusted and began drafting a short email with the subject line, "Request for consult, urgent." The email to the attorney sent with a soft whoosh, and my screen returned to the timeline like nothing had happened. I kept going. A clean spreadsheet helped me think. Dates down the left, 3 columns across, overtime blocks, card charges, badge scans. I added a 4th for vehicles, what I could remember from the curb and the hotel lot. Black sedan, tinted windows, Georgia plate, numbers I'd only caught in pieces. I wrote those fragments down anyway. Partial information still narrows the world. At lunch the next day, I drove back toward Midtown and parked on a public street near the building. No attempt to enter, no call to my wife. I walked the sidewalk like any other person killing time and noted where cameras sat. City poles, parking decks, storefront security domes. Public footage wasn't something you just took, but you could request it through the proper channels if you had a report number or a legal reason. Elena had already told me which routes were clean and which ones would make me look like the problem. I stopped at a coffee shop, bought a drink I didn't want, and wrote down the camera locations on a napkin, then transferred them into my notes before the ink smeared. Later, I met Elena at a diner off Piedmont Road. Nothing special. Vinyl booths, a waitress who called everyone Hun. I slid into the seat across from her and set my phone face down. Elena didn't reach for it. She watched my hands. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Keep it boring. Boring wins." "It doesn't feel boring," I replied. "That's because you're living it," she said. "In a hearing or an investigation, emotion won't matter. Process will." A plate clattered behind the counter. Someone laughed too loudly at a joke I couldn't hear. Life kept rolling, while mine turned into a file. "No traps," Elena continued. "No sneaking into systems. No gotcha conversations. If you record anything, follow Georgia law. If you request footage, do it through lawful channels. You want the truth to stand up on its own." I nodded and sipped coffee that had already cooled. Halfway through our talk, my phone vibrated. A notification from my email provider. New sign-in. Location, unknown device. I didn't panic. I took a screenshot, then another. I changed my password before the screen could dim. 2-factor authentication went on for everything I could think of. Email, banking, cloud storage. Elena watched without commenting. She only spoke when I finished. "They're checking you," she said. As if to prove her point, a text came through from a blocked number. "Don't ruin her career." No name, no explanation, just that line, like my wife's career belonged to them and my role was to stay quiet. I saved it. Screenshot, export, folder. That evening, while taking the trash out, I noticed a car idling across the street. Same spot it hadn't been in before. Engine running, driver's head down. When I glanced over, the car didn't move. The person didn't wave. Nothing. I went back inside and locked the door, then added another entry to the timeline. Unknown vehicle parked across from house, 8:12 p.m., stayed at least 10 minutes. No adjectives, no theories. In bed, my wife turned away from me and scrolled on her phone, face unreadable. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, then reached to the nightstand, picked up my phone again, and opened the draft folder where the evidence files sat, renaming each one with the date and time. My wife came home early for the first time in weeks, and I knew something had happened before she said a word. She walked in with a manila folder pressed against her side like it was holding her up. Her heels clicked once, then stopped. Keys hit the counter. She didn't take off her coat. "What is that?" I asked. She tried to answer, but her throat caught. She cleared it and slid the folder across the kitchen island. At the top was a letter addressed to her by name, not a casual email, formal, printed. The kind of thing people send when they're already preparing a record. Request for explanation. It referenced a discrepancy tied to vendor payments and approval authority. It wasn't calling her guilty, not yet. It was worse than that. It was asking her to account for something that could turn into a liability if she didn't. She sat down hard, like her legs gave up. "They want a statement by Monday," she said. Her voice didn't sound like a CEO in that moment. It sounded like a person backed into a wall. I read the letter once, then again, slower. Names of the board, a partner firm, a compliance committee. Every line carried the message, "Someone is pulling strings above you." "Who told you about this?" I asked. She looked at her hands. "It came through counsel," she said. "Whose counsel?" A pause that wasn't long, but it was loud. "Company counsel," she finally replied. The silence between us thickened. She pressed her fingers to her eyes, and when she dropped her hands, tears were there. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady, like a faucet that wouldn't shut off. "I didn't do what they're implying," she said. "I didn't." "Then tell me what you did do," I answered. She shook her head, almost angry at herself. "I can't," she whispered. "Not like that." "Not like that. Not here. Not with you." She didn't say the last part, but it hung in the room anyway. My phone buzzed, an email notification, from a law firm I'd never contacted. Subject, cease and desist. I opened it and skimmed. Accusations dressed up as professionalism, claims that I had been harassing employees, attempting to access restricted information, creating a hostile environment. It warned me not to contact staff, not to appear on property, not to interfere with ongoing business operations. They hadn't even called me first. They'd written me into a story where I was already the villain. My wife saw my face shift and sat up straighter. "What?" she asked. I turned the screen toward her. She read the first paragraph, then stiffened like she'd been slapped. "I didn't authorize this," she said fast. "But it came from your company," I replied. Her eyes darted away, not to hide emotion, to avoid responsibility. The next day I went back to Midtown anyway, stayed outside, on public ground, because I wasn't giving anyone the satisfaction of catching me where I didn't belong. The guard stepped out of the lobby doors like he'd been waiting. "You again," he said, loud enough for people nearby to hear. I kept walking, not toward him, past him. "You're not welcome," he called after me. "You're causing problems." I didn't answer. One response and he'd have what he wanted, an incident. When I reached my car, my hands shook for the first time in days. Not from fear of him, from the realization that people had started drawing boundaries around me like I was the threat. That night, I drove to Piedmont Park and parked without getting out. I sat there with the engine off, watching my phone glow in my palm. The quiet inside the car pressed in, and the thought landed plain and sharp. If I stayed silent much longer, they'd finish writing this without me. I opened my messages and typed to Elena. "Tomorrow I file." Elena met me outside a law office downtown the next morning and walked in beside me like she belonged there. She'd told me to keep my voice level, keep my hands empty, keep my story short. Lawyers don't need your pain, they need your facts. The consult didn't last long. I left with a list of next steps and a reminder that anything I did from here on out needed to look the way it was: clean, documented, lawful. On the sidewalk, Elena glanced at her phone, then at me. "Someone wants to talk," she said. "Not by email." She drove us to a building I'd never visited, the kind of corporate place that could be any company if you removed the logo. We checked in, sat in a waiting area for a few minutes, then got escorted to a glass conference room. No introductions on the way, no small talk, just a door and a polite nod. A woman came in carrying a slim folder, mid-40s, neat hair, tired eyes. She didn't smile. "I can't be here long," she said. "Then don't waste time," Elena replied. The woman set the folder down but didn't slide it across. "There is an internal review," she said, careful with every word. "I'm not giving you company documents. I'm confirming what you already suspect." My throat tightened, but I stayed quiet. She opened the folder just enough to show a printed page. Badge access logs. Redacted in places, but the important lines were visible. Dates, times, door locations. The senior operations executive's badge showed up again and again. So did the lobby guard's ID, not just at the front desk, but in restricted areas he had no reason to enter. "He's not just a guard," I said. The woman didn't answer directly. "There was an email," she continued, pulling out another page. "A warning that never reached your wife's inbox. It was intercepted." I leaned forward and read the header. It referenced vendor approvals and an irregular override. Someone had flagged it. Someone else had buried it. "Why show me this?" I asked. She took a breath, like she didn't enjoy any part of this. "Because if this lands where it's heading," she said, "it will look like she allowed it, and she didn't build that company to be someone's cover." The words landed with weight. Not a defense of my wife as a spouse, a defense of her as a person who didn't want to be trapped. I glanced at Elena. She gave me a small nod, the kind that meant, "Take it. Don't ask for more." "I need to keep my name out of this," the woman added. "Understood," Elena said. "We won't quote you. We'll use what we can verify." The woman stood, pushed the papers back into the folder, then paused. "Look at who controls access," she said, eyes locked on mine. "Not the titles, the doors." Then she left without shaking hands. Elena and I walked out in silence. Once we reached the car, I opened my laptop and pulled up my timeline. Badge logs in one window, transactions in another, calendar blocks in a third. The overlaps weren't random anymore. They stacked neatly, like someone had been counting on no one ever lining them up. The lobby guard wasn't guarding people. He was filtering them. I saved the new notes, added the redactions to my list, and began drafting a formal request through counsel for records I could lawfully obtain, keeping my wording plain and tight, the way you write when you want the truth to survive contact with power. The conference room downtown didn't belong to my wife's company. Neutral ground. Rented space inside a partner firm's office. That detail mattered. It meant people were already thinking about optics and records. Elena sat to my right. The attorney I'd hired sat to my left with a legal pad and a calm face. Across the table were three people I hadn't met before. One from the board, one from the outside partner group, and a compliance director with a tight jaw. My wife arrived last. She didn't look at me when she took her seat. Then he walked in. Same man from Buckhead, same smooth suit. He carried himself like the room should adjust around him. He didn't introduce himself to me. He nodded at the board member like they were familiar. The meeting started with formalities, dates, references to policies, ongoing review. The language stayed polite, but the intention underneath it felt sharp. When it was his turn to speak, he leaned back and clasped his hands like he was about to explain something simple to people who didn't understand. "This has become a personal matter," he said. "Marcus has been showing up unannounced, taking photos, calling staff. It's disruptive. It's creating risk." He turned his head slightly toward the compliance director. We can't have a jealous spouse stalking executives, he added. My wife flinched, almost invisible. No one else reacted. Old heat tried to rise in my chest, the familiar urge to defend myself, to prove I wasn't what a man like that said I was. I'd felt that in other rooms, other years, being reduced to a stereotype because it was convenient. I kept my hands still. My attorney spoke first. We're here to address financial irregularities and access control, she said, not character judgments. The man smiled like she'd missed the point. Character is the point, he replied. Unstable behavior leads to unstable outcomes. Elena shifted in her seat, but I shook my head once. Small. Enough. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mention the flowers. I didn't talk about humiliation. I slid my folder across the table. Here's a timeline, I said. It starts with vendor payments authorized under my name without my approval. It continues with badge access logs that match those transactions. And it includes records of calendar blocks marked overtime that overlap with off-site meetings. The compliance director opened the folder and began flipping through. The board member leaned forward. The man's smile didn't vanish, but it tightened. Those logs can be interpreted, he said. They can be verified, I replied. I pointed to one page, then another, letting the paper do the talking. This badge, I said, tapping the senior operations executive's ID number, shows repeated access to restricted areas after hours. That same window matches the override approvals tied to the vendor account. My attorney added the transaction numbers. Elena referenced the voicemail and the cease and desist as evidence of intimidation, not protection. The man interrupted. This is conspiracy thinking, he said. He's connecting dots that aren't connected. The compliance director stopped flipping pages. She looked up. Why would a lobby security ID appear in restricted access logs? She asked, voice flat. No one answered right away. The board member cleared his throat. My wife stared at the table, jaw clenched, breathing shallow. The man tried again, softer this time. We're getting distracted, he said. The CEO needs to focus on... On what? Elena cut in. Cleaning up what you touched? That landed. Not because it was loud, because it was direct. The room went quiet in a way I'd only heard in interviews when someone realizes the narrative has slipped out of their hands. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply closed the folder, stood up, and nodded once to my attorney. You have what you need, I said. No one stopped me as I walked out, phone already in my hand, scrolling to the next email thread I planned to send before I reached the elevator. The first official notice didn't come to me. It came through counsel. Elena forwarded the email with one line. It's moving. The company placed him on administrative leave within 48 hours. Not because anyone suddenly grew a conscience, but because the records didn't give them room to pretend. A week later, the language changed from leave to termination. The board's statement stayed bland. Policy violations, breach of trust, pending review. Yet everyone in that world understood what it meant. The security guard disappeared from the lobby around the same time. A different face sat behind the desk when I drove past on a weekday. No smirk, no comments, just a man doing a job that didn't include managing my marriage. The legal part moved in its own slow rhythm. Requests, responses, additional questions. At some point, the phrase, referral to appropriate authorities, appeared in a letter. Careful and sanitized, the way corporations say someone might get charged without saying it. At home, nothing felt dramatic. It felt hollow. My wife tried to talk twice, not in a clean conversation, not with clarity, more like she was testing whether I would soften. You don't understand what position I was in, she said one night, standing in the doorway of my office. I understand enough, I replied. She waited for more. She didn't get it. Another time, she said my name the way she used to, like it could pull me back into the old arrangement. Marcus, please. I kept my eyes on the document I was signing. She wasn't asking for truth. She was asking for relief. I learned something about myself in that stretch of days. Silence can look like strength, but it can also be surrender. I had surrendered too often, telling myself I was protecting peace when I was really avoiding conflict. That habit had made room for people who liked doors more than they liked boundaries. So I separated things the way my work had trained me to. Marriage on one side, accountability on the other. Her fear didn't erase the damage. Her pressure didn't turn my name into an approval stamp. Her position didn't give anyone the right to lock me out, use me, then paint me as unstable when I asked questions. My attorney handled the filings. Elena kept me from making sloppy choices. I followed instructions, showed up when required, signed what needed signing, and said as little as possible outside those rooms. The last time my wife tried to pull me into a late-night conversation, I was taping a box shut. She stood in the hallway, watching me fold flaps like I'd done it 100 times. "So that's it?" she asked. I picked up the marker, wrote my name on the side of the box, then carried it to the front door and set it down with the others, keys already in my pocket as I checked the lock one more time before stepping outside.